The first time Ethan saw her, she looked like a ghost made of breath and winter fog, folded into herself on a cracked plastic bench near the bus stop. Snow clung to her dark hair in uneven clumps, and her thin blazer was soaked through. It was nearly midnight, and the streetlights painted everything in a tired yellow. Ethan shifted the sleeping weight of his 7-year-old daughter Lily higher on his back and tried to walk past. The smart thing was to hurry home, lock the door, reheat some leftover soup, and pretend the world outside the thin walls of their apartment did not exist. But Lily lifted her head from his shoulder just enough to whisper that ruined word that always tore through his fear. "Daddy, she is shaking. We cannot just leave her." Ethan stopped, his breath clouding in the air, and turned toward the stranger, who could barely hold a cup of vending machine coffee between her trembling hands. He had no idea that letting this shivering woman step across his threshold would change the course of his next Monday. And more than that. Only a few hours earlier, their tiny one-bedroom apartment had been filled with the ordinary noise of their life. The radiator clicked and wheezed in the corner, doing more complaining than actual heating. The old couch sagged in the middle, evidence of too many nights when Ethan had given Lily the bed and taken the cushions for himself. A faded photograph of a smiling woman, Lily, pressed against her side, stood crooked on the bookshelf. Ethan had kissed the frame before leaving for his late shift at the warehouse, as he always did, a quiet habit that felt like a prayer he did not quite know how to put into words. Bills were magneted to the fridge, a silent chorus of numbers he could not quite reach. On Monday, his supervisor had said there would be a meeting with the new top leadership. Rumors of layoffs and restructuring drifted through every break room. Ethan had nodded, kept his head down, and silently asked God for enough strength to get through whatever was coming, and enough wisdom for whoever would sit in the big office far above him. The bus that night was nearly empty, the kind of silent ride where everyone pretended to be alone. Snow streaked across the windows in long white lines. Lily leaned against him, tracing little hearts in the fog on the glass, until her eyes grew heavy. When they stepped off at their stop, the wind sliced through Ethan's thin jacket. That was when he saw her. The woman sat hunched over, arms wrapped so tightly around herself it looked painful. Her heels were in her hands, bare feet on the freezing concrete, like she had given up halfway through being put together. A once expensive handbag lay open at her side, contents scattered like she had tried to find something, lost it, and then lost the will to try again. Ethan shifted his daughter slightly, cleared his throat, and spoke with the cautious tone of a man who had seen too much trouble find people who meant well. "Mom, are you all right?" Her head lifted slowly. Her eyes were red, not from cold alone. "Someone took my bag. My phone died. The hotel, they said no rooms left because of the storm. I thought I could wait for a cab, but none are coming." Her teeth chattered between half-formed words. Ethan felt every instinct built from years of protecting his daughter and his fragile peace rise in protest. You do not bring strangers into your home when you have a child. You do not take risks when you are barely hanging on. But Lily squirmed in his arms, wriggling until he set her down on the sidewalk. The little girl walked over with the fearless grace of children who have not yet been taught to look away from suffering. She held out the knitted scarf from around her own neck. "You can use this," she said simply, her small voice clear in the cold air. The woman stared at the offered scarf as if it was something sacred. Then she looked up at Ethan, ashamed. "I just need somewhere warm for a bit. A lobby, a hallway, anything. I will be gone by morning, I promise." He looked down at Lily, who was already wrapping the scarf around the woman with clumsy, determined hands. He thought of the photo on his shelf, of how his late wife had welcomed neighbors who needed a meal, even when the cupboards were thin. Ethan took a breath that felt like a decision. "I have a couch," he said. "It is not much. But it is warm. You and Lily can take the bed," she began to protest, but he shook his head. "The bed is already claimed. The couch is open. You can stay there tonight. That is all I can offer. It will have to be enough." Their apartment looked even smaller, with an unexpected guest inside, but Lily moved through it like a proud hostess. She handed the woman a towel and one of Ethan's old sweaters, far too large but infinitely warmer than her soaked blazer. Ethan heated a pot of chicken noodle soup on the stove, the steam fogging the small kitchen window. The woman sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the borrowed mug of tea. She said her name softly, like she was not sure she wanted to be known. Maya. No last name, no details. Ethan did not press. He talked instead about Lily's spelling test and the way the snow always made the city feel a little quieter, like God had put a blanket over the noise for a while. Lily asked questions that adults were too polite or too afraid to pose. Why were you out there alone? Do you not have anyone to walk with you? Maya hesitated, then answered in the most honest way she could manage. Sometimes, when work becomes too heavy, I walk until I cannot feel the weight for a while. I walked farther than I meant to tonight. She did not say that only hours earlier she had left a long table lined with board members and lawyers. That thick folders full of numbers and names had waited for her decision. That she had escaped out a side door of a building where her name shone in steel letters. She only knew that she had felt more seen by this tired man and his curious child than she had at that expensive table. Later, when Lily was tucked into bed with her worn stuffed rabbit, Ethan stood in the doorway of their small room for a long moment. He read a few lines from a children's Bible, the one with pages that had been turned so many times they felt like cloth. Then he bowed his head beside her and prayed. He thanked God for keeping them safe through another day, for hot soup and a working bus and that thin radiator that tried so hard. He asked for help with the meeting on Monday, for whoever would lead the company to remember that every decision would touch real families. Briefly, he added a simple sideways prayer for the woman asleep on his couch. For Maya, that she would find her way and not feel so alone. In the living room, half awake under a borrowed blanket, Maya listened to the low murmur of his words floating through the thin wall. Her eyes stung, and a single tear slipped down to the coarse fabric beneath her cheek. No one had prayed for her in a very long time. On Monday morning, Ethan believed he would walk into a conference room and shake hands with a stranger who could decide the fate of his job. He did not know that the stranger already knew the feel of his couch and the sound of his voice when he spoke to heaven. Morning crept into the small apartment with a thin grey light, the kind that makes everything look a little softer and a little sad. Ethan woke on the couch with a start, his neck stiff and his back reminding him that he was closer to 40 than 30 now. For a second, he was confused by the neatly folded blanket at his feet and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume in the air. Then he remembered the shivering woman from the bus stop, the way Lily had wrapped her own scarf around her shoulders. The couch across from him was empty, the pillow fluffed with the careful touch of someone who did not want to leave a mark. On the coffee table beside the chipped mug lay a small note weighed down by a single coin from his change jar. The handwriting was steady, but pressed too hard, like the person had been holding her breath. Thank you for the couch, for the soup, and for the prayer. You will never know how much that meant. There was no name, no phone number, no hint of who she really was, only a final line. I hope Monday is kinder to you than tonight was to me. He stared at the words for a long time, then slid the note carefully into the frame behind his wife's photograph, as if letting both women keep watch over him and Lily.
Sunday moved past in its familiar, frugal rhythm. They went to the small church 3 blocks away, the one with coffee that tasted mostly like water but smiles that felt like real warmth. Ethan kept glancing at the door, half expecting Maya to walk in wearing that borrowed sweater, half hoping it was all some strange dream. The sermon was about entertaining angels without knowing it, about how sometimes the people who cross your threshold in their worst moment are the very people God intends you to love. Ethan felt the words settle heavy and gentle in his chest. After service, Lily told their pastor in proud detail how her daddy had let a freezing lady sleep on their couch. The pastor chuckled, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder, and said that it sounded exactly like the kind of thing his wife would have done. Ethan smiled tightly, his eyes burning more than he wanted to admit. That evening, after Lily fell asleep, he ironed his one good shirt for the meeting on Monday. As he pressed the thin fabric, he whispered another quiet plea. Lord, whoever is making decisions up there, let them remember what it feels like down here, where every hour on the clock pays for bread and rent and school shoes. Monday morning wrapped the city in a hard, bright light that made the snow glare from the sidewalks. Inside the warehouse, there was a hum of nervous energy. Men and women who had been on their feet for years now shifted their weight anxiously, fingers tapping against clipboards and steel shelves. The notice had been clear: mandatory staff Meeting. Introduction of new top leadership. Possible restructuring. That last word hung in the air like a storm cloud. They gathered in the large conference space on the ground floor, a room Ethan had rarely entered. At the far end, a sleek podium stood in front of a screen where the company logo looped in glowing colors. Several people in expensive suits clustered near the front, speaking in low tones, their watches and shoes shining in the fluorescent light. Ethan took a place near the back beside his friend Marco, who muttered that men like them were invisible to the ones on stage. Ethan tried to listen, tried to steady his breathing, but his mind kept catching on the memory of a woman curled on his couch, whispering that sometimes work became too heavy to carry. When the room settled and the rustle of chairs died down, a man from Human Resources spoke into the microphone, his voice too cheerful for the gravity of the moment. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke of transitions and opportunities, and then turned toward the side door with a rehearsed smile. "It is my great honor to introduce our new Chief Executive Officer." There was a small swell of polite applause as the door opened. The woman who stepped through wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been made just for her. Her dark hair pulled back, her posture straight and calm. For one suspended heartbeat, Ethan thought his mind was playing a cruel trick on him. Tisamae's, once rimmed with tears and exhaustion, now clear and focused. The same mouth that had whispered in his dim kitchen that she walked until the weight of work blurred at the edges. Her gaze swept the room, composed and distant, until it collided with his. For a fraction of a second, everything else fell away. The applause, the lights, the worried faces. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the podium, the only sign that she felt the shock. Then she drew in a slow breath and began to speak in a measured, professional tone about numbers and goals and futures. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Maya was not just any stranger dragging her feet through the snow. She was the one person in this building who could decide whether he carried boxers here next month or stood in a line somewhere else with a cardboard sign. For most of the presentation, Ethan watched her with the double vision of someone who had seen both sides of the same coin. He heard the practiced phrases about market shifts and strategic adjustments, but he also remembered how her hands had shaken as she wrapped Lilia's scarf around herself. He noticed the way she paused before mentioning layoffs, as if weighing not only the financial impact, but the faces in front of her. Near the end, she said they had begun by reviewing every department, walking the floor with managers and supervisors to see the work firsthand. "We want to remember that there are real people behind every chart and projection," she said. "People who go home to families, to cramped apartments, to second jobs, and sick parents and school projects." For a moment, her eyes softened in a way that had nothing to do with charts. Ethan felt his breath catch. After the meeting broke up, the room dissolved into clusters of anxious conversations. Names were called to stay behind for brief individual meetings. Ethan's name was on the list. As he walked toward the smaller conference room, each step felt heavier. Marco squeezed his shoulder, whispering that no matter what happened, God saw them. Ethan nodded, but his palms were damp. Inside the smaller room, it was just Maya, another executive with a laptop, and a stack of folders. Up close, she looked exactly as she had in his living room, without the exhaustion, but with a new steadiness. She greeted him by name, the same last name she had seen written on a children's Bible on his coffee table. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with employer and employee. She thanked the other executive and asked him to give them a moment, her voice firm but gentle. When the door closed, the professional mask slipped just enough for him to see the woman from the bus stop again. "You gave up your couch for a stranger." "When you barely have enough space for yourself," she said quietly. "You fed me when your fridge was mostly empty. And you prayed for a faceless leader to remember men like you, not knowing that leader was lying 10 feet away, listening." Ethan swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He managed only a simple question that came out more like a confession. "I was afraid they would cut my hours." "That you would cut my hours." She opened the folder in front of her, glanced down, then pushed it toward him. "This is not a notice of reduction," she said. "It is a promotion. Floor supervisor, better pay, fixed schedule, more time with your daughter. We need people in this company who remember what really matters. Your kindness did not buy you this, Ethan, but it reminded me of the kind of leader I asked God to help me become when I almost walked past my own breaking point on Saturday night. For the first time in a long while, he felt something like hope rise without the familiar companion of dread. When Ethan stepped out of the conference room, the tension in his shoulders had eased, but the weight in his hands had changed. He carried not just a new title on paper, but a quiet understanding that his small act of hospitality had rippled farther than he could see. That evening, as he and Lily sat at their little table with take-out pizza to celebrate, he told her that the lady from the couch was now the one making the big decisions at his work. Lily grinned wide, sauce on her chin, and said that maybe God had used their old couch as a meeting room. Ethan laughed, a deep sound that seemed to clear dust from corners inside his heart. Later, as snow began to fall again outside their window, he added one more magnet to the fridge, holding up the promotion letter beside the unpaid bills. It was not a solution to everything, but it was a start. A few miles away, in a high office with a view of the same snow, Maya sat alone at a polished desk, her expensive chair turned toward the window. On the corner of her desk, a cheap knitted scarf rested like a banner of another world, one where warmth did not come from price tags, but from open doors and shared soup. She bowed her head and whispered a grateful prayer for a single dad and his brave little girl who had treated her not as a title, but as a soul in need. Then she picked up her pen and began to sign off on changes that would protect more jobs than any chart had originally suggested, letting mercy tilt the numbers. Share this story if it touched your heart.